was younger, I used to love watching Indian movies, specifically Tamil ones. My mother tongue is Tamil, a language commonly spoken in southern India, and both my parents spoke it quite frequently around the house. So, naturally, I ended up picking up some of it too, and I started watching Tamil content as well. But since the household I grew up in wasn't too strict about me learning the language, I was more able to understand the language on a basic level rather than speak it. I am glad that my mom didn't force me to learn the language though, because it was my inability to really speak Tamil that really made me try pursuing another language, Japanese. Now, I personally think it is interesting to learn another language because it exposes you to the culture of the countries that use that language. For example, I never thought that I would try Japanese food until I started learning the language. Neither did I think I'd start getting so into origami when I started first learning the language. Of course, you can eat different cuisines and try new activities without actually learning about the language or the culture behind them, but it often encourages you to do these things when you are learning about the country that they came from. There's also the undeniable fact that learning another language helps broaden your perspective on many different topics. In Japanese schools, for example, rules are much stricter. I live in America and go to a public school, so we don't have any uniforms, something completely opposite to Japan. There's also the fact that high school in Japan, which is from 10th to 12th grade, is not mandatory to attend, so after 9th grade, you might end up going straight out of school and getting a job, depending on your circumstances. Still, even comparing these two schooling systems, it was really interesting, because I hadn't had much exposure to school systems outside of the US. Now, I'll talk about a little story about how I passed the whole thing with my mother tongue, decided to actually take Japanese. When I was choosing classes for my 8th grade year, I had to decide, did I want to take PE for another year, physical education, or did I really want to take world language? You see, my middle school had made it so that if we took on foreign language, we wouldn't have enough time to take PE as well. And me being a kid who really disliked physical education, especially in middle school, was more than happy to take a foreign language to avoid PE. I didn't really realize at the time, though, how much weight that decision would have on me as a person. So, I was deciding about which language I wanted to take. I looked at the 3 choices: Spanish, French, and Japanese. Okay, first up, Spanish. A pretty commonly learned language, and one that would certainly be useful in the Americas at least. French, another common European language that many people signed up for. And then I looked at the last option. I thought about it. Well, I didn't really want to take a language just to get out of another class. I wanted the class to be interesting. I didn't want it to be boring to sit through. And personally, English being my first language, I knew that rather than learning Spanish or French, which both had roots in Latin, they wouldn't really be that interesting to me, and they wouldn't really hold up my attention. So I chose the other choice, Japanese. At first, for Japanese, I chose it because, well, it was the third choice. But as I started looking more into Japanese as a language, I started thinking it was pretty interesting. Not only did it have a different base language, but it also used a different writing system, and it made me feel like I was getting closer to my Asian roots, even if it was with a language that was very different from Tamil. So I ended up choosing Japanese. And it really influenced things such as my hobbies and interests. There are people out there who start learning Japanese because they watched anime and read manga, but honestly, I was the opposite. I watched anime and read manga only after I actually started learning the language. And simply because I was curious about it. But once I actually started doing these things, I started really enjoying them. I was a person whose formerly biggest hobby was reading books, of course, so it was something that really catered to my interests. Of course, not every language has something like anime that can draw people in, but most do have a very enjoyable aspect to them that people will be interested in. Now, talking about some of the benefits of learning a foreign language. It helps with decision making. Studies show that decisions made in your second language are usually more logic-based than ones made in your first language. This is because when we are making logic-based decisions in our first language, we often allow our emotional responses and personal biases to dictate what we say. However, when we are talking another language, we end up distancing ourselves from these biases and allowing for decisions that are based on the facts of an issue more than the emotional responses that they provoke from us. I personally have really noticed this aspect of the language, as when you're talking in another language, you really have to take the time to choose how you communicate, which for me as a person who can be pretty emotional at times is helpful for me. In addition to this, learning a foreign language can help improve your communication skills in your first language. When you learn a second language, you flexibly start to compare that language with your first language. And doing so, you gain a better grasp of your first language. By learning about different grammatical and structural elements in another language helps you become more aware of these aspects in your first language. And this often doesn't occur to people who are speaking in their first language, because people who grow up speaking their first language don't really tend to analyze something that they don't have to think about when they're saying. Again, Japanese, for comparison, has pretty different grammatical structures to English, so it is interesting to look at how complicated English grammar is compared to Japanese grammar. I also believe that, personally, I've gotten better at communicating and writing in general, some of which is definitely for me thanks to learning Japanese. Now, this graph is about how American language learners are diversifying the different languages they're taking. Now, it's a graph from 1958 to 2016 that shows the number of students enrolled in selected languages at U.S. universities, and it really shows how the number of languages people are learning have really grown. I mean, there's more choice in languages, but also just the number of people learning foreign languages, the enthusiasm for it has really grown. It's a really interesting graph, so I recommend you look into it on your own. Well, now I'm getting back to my main point, which is why I'm even saying all this. Well, it's because I believe that learning a second language, or even just another language, is useful, and I believe that more language options should be offered in high schools. Currently, Spanish and French are the most taught foreign languages in the US. Now, don't get me wrong, both those languages are fairly nice. I like them, but many people want to take options that aren't just Spanish or French, and they have various reasons they want to do so. I can very confidently say that many of the people taking Spanish and French only did so because there wasn't really any other option for them to take. In the end, I was happy that I chose to learn Japanese, and the fact that I had that option was what allowed me to be enthusiastic in that class. It makes a big difference having a choice in which language you want to learn, or get to learn. Now, by allowing for more languages to be implemented into high school curriculums, I believe that students will become much more enthusiastic about taking these languages. It is a requirement in U.S. public schools, at least, to take a certain number of years for a foreign language, so why not make it fun? Basically, I propose that public schools take the time to find out what languages their incoming or attending students are interested in learning, and try to take into consideration teaching these languages. Not all options have to be chosen, but the 3 to 4 ones that have garnered the most interest can be taught. This will not only help boost enthusiasm and therefore grades for these foreign language classes, but also make the students consider taking the foreign language they are learning for more than the 1 to 2 year minimum requirement. Now, before I go, I want to talk to all of the teens here, or even all the adults out there who are even the slightest bit interested in learning another language. Learning a foreign language will always be hard. It will always be something about the language culture that you'll disagree with. But I ask all the people out there, kids in school and even the adults, to think about truly taking a foreign language. Not just for that 2-year requirement that you need in high school, or for it to look good on your college application. Think about taking a language that you will truly enjoy. Because even if it starts out as something small, learning a foreign language can truly change how you live your life.